Hello, everybody. This is BeerSmith episode number 102, and it's late April 2015. Today, Denny Conn joins me to talk about improving your beer. Thank you to this week's sponsor, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They're now offering 6 issues a year, up from 4 at a great discount. They're offering a new discount code, which gives you 15% off everything in their store, including subscriptions and training. The new code is BeerSmith 2015. I encourage you to check out this great new magazine for homebrewers at beerandbrewing.com and use the offer code BeerSmith 2015 to get your 15% discount today. And also, Brewha. The Brewha BIAC is a full control beer brewing system in which all aspects of beer making, from water heating to fermentation, occur in just one high-quality stainless steel vessel. It takes up less space, requires less time, and costs less money than a traditional system, while still offering you full control and repeatability. Check out the new Brewha BIAC at brewhaequipment.com. And finally, you can join over 50,000 brewers getting the free BeerSmith newsletter. I'll send you an email every week with a new article on beer brewing. To sign up, just go to beersmith.com and put your name and email address in the newsletter box on the right sidebar. I'd like to apologize a little bit for this week. We had a couple technical glitches with Denny Conn. He had a limited time window, and also we had a few connection issues, so the audio quality and video quality are not quite up to par, but I still think you'll find this episode very valuable. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, Denny Conn joins me to talk about evaluating and improving your beer. Denny is co-author of the recent book, Experimental Homebrewing, and also has a website on batch sparging at dennybrew.com. Denny's been on the show 4 times before, most recently on podcast number 90. Denny, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Brad. Good to talk to you.
It's good to have you back on the show. What have you been doing lately?
I've been traveling a lot, man. The book has really become popular and taken off. So I've been going around doing book signings, seminars, talking to clubs. Up in Seattle 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I was over in Redmond, Oregon with the Cascade Fermentation Association, talking to their homebrew club meeting. Got a couple of the breweries over there even made a special version of my American mild recipe for me. So that was kind of nice. Last weekend, I was down in Arcata, California for the Humboldt Homebrew Fest, which was just a killer event. Mike McDowell and I both went down and kind of did a no-holds-barred question and answer session, which was a ton of fun, really instructive. And when I'm not traveling around, I am hard at work on the next book that Drew and I are working on, which is called Homebrew All-Stars.
Homebrew All-Star. What is Homebrew All-Stars all about?
Well, we interviewed a bunch of people that we think are really all-star homebrewers. Geez, imagine that. People you know, like Gordon Strong, John Palmer, Mike McDowell, people like that. And then a lot of other people whose names you maybe don't know, but have a lot to contribute to the homebrewing community. And then we're kind of dividing them up by archetype, like a scientist or an experimenter or a recipe wizard or a tinkerer, stuff like that. So that as you read through the book, you can look for advice from the person whose brewing style kind of fits the way you like to brew. Very
cool. That sounds like an exciting book. When is that going to be finished up?
Well,
he laughs knowingly.
Yeah. Well, I'll just assume that our editor Tom is listening to this, so I'll say that the party line is that we're going to have it done by the 1st of June, and it will be out a year from June.
About a year from now, then, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we want to have it out in time for NHC 2016.
Well, switching topics, today you wanted to talk about both evaluating beer and how to make incremental improvements in your beer. Can you give us a quick overview?
Yeah, well, what I find too often is that homebrewers don't really evaluate their beer objectively when it comes to things like procedures and ingredients, techniques. They have a tendency to, brew a batch, maybe brew another batch kind of like it's 6 months down the road and try and compare them. my whole thing is that because I'm a very lazy person, I don't like to do anything that isn't going to pay off in making better beer or having more fun when I'm brewing. It's a hobby. You got to be having fun. So I try and use objective beer evaluation techniques to decide if what I'm doing is really making better beer and is really worth my time and effort.
So you've done a number of experiments related to that as well, right?
Yeah, I have. Through the years, I've done a lot of them. A couple that are pretty well known are experiments I did on decoction and first wort hopping. And, again, both of those are techniques that I want to know if they really pay off and are really worth the effort. My mantra is always make the best beer possible while having the most fun possible while doing the least work possible. That's what it's all about. And of course, the corollary to that is to do whatever it is you make that makes your beer better, but just make sure that it really is making your beer better, or that at least you're enjoying yourself as you do it.
So what are some of the keys to getting the most out of your beer with the least amount of effort?
Well, the key is to make sure that you're not wasting time doing things. And I kind of came to this mindset probably 15 years ago when I'd only been brewing for a couple of years. And, a lot of people were talking about doing decoction brews and how they really added to the beer. And I had done a couple of them, and I just happened to have the same beer on tap. One version that I decocted, and then I'd brewed it again, and I had not done a decoction. And I went to pour myself a pint one day and thought that I was pouring myself the decocted beer, ended up getting the non-decocted beer, and realized that it really didn't make any difference. It tasted pretty much the same as the one that I had spent hours and hours doing a decoction on. So that kind of led me into asking brewers around the world to do something similar, where they would brew the same recipe, although use one version with any decoction schedule they wanted, and the other version with any non-decoction schedule they wanted. They could still do step mashes if they wanted to do that. Tastings were held at the locations of the people around the world, and here in Eugene, where I brewed two versions and a friend of mine brewed another beer. And when the results came out, it began looking like maybe decoction doesn't make enough of a difference to be worth the effort.
So what was the overall methodology you used? It sounds like you brewed two different beers in two different places. How many people were actually involved in the judging?
There were right here in my location. There were about I have to look at my notes here. I would say that there were about 18 people here in Eugene, and there were 5 beers tested, and 3 of them were brewed here. One was brewed in Australia, and boy, I can't remember where the other one was brewed, but all those people had put together their own tasting panels to taste the beers. These results are, all over the place. If you look at the NHC conference presentations from 2008, my results are there and you can see them. But basically, people were really divided on the purported benefits of decoction being real. Decoction is supposed to make a maltier beer. Well, in general, more people found the decocted beer to be maltier than the infused beer. But if you put the infused beer together with the people who had no preference, those were actually more than thought the decoction beer had a better malt body. And that's kind of the way it went all the way through in every category that we tested for. Sometimes the decoction beer would be preferred, sometimes the infused beer would be preferred. But if you added the no preference in with the people who preferred the infused beer, in every single instance, it was greater than the number of people who preferred the decocted beer.
Now didn't you use, I'm trying to recall the experiment, didn't you use several categories of evaluation in addition to just preference for the decocted versus non-decocted?
We asked people which beer was maltier, which one had more body, which one was sweeter, which one had better head retention, which one better fit the BJCP style category. And then we asked people to guess which beer was decocted and which beer wasn't. And I should say, in this case, more people picked the infused beer as decocted than actually correctly picked the decocted beer. Um, I will say that this being my first experiment, the methodology wasn't perfect. Um, I I didn't do a blind triangle test, and I actually told people that one of these beers was decocted and the other one wasn't before we started, so they had an idea what was going on. I don't feel that that totally invalidates the results, and to make up for it, I intend to start this fall repeating three of my biggest experiments, the decoction experiment, the first wort hopping experiment, and an experiment I did many years ago, which was priming with different substances and seeing if there was any difference in those.
What level of decoction did you do? Did you just do a simple one step, or was it a full three stage? What?
Different people did different things, and I didn't actually ask them to do any particular method because what I wanted was something that the typical home brewer would do, right? I didn't want to dictate what you did. I wanted to see what you would do if you were given the opportunity to do it. I made a I made a Munich Dunkel that had a single decoction with a 30-minute boil, and I made a German Pilsner that actually was double decocted and each boil, and that was 30 minutes. Other people did different things, everything from a single 30-minute decoction up to triple decoctions with boils for an hour. So, it was all over the board.
So quite a bit of variation there. But
yeah.
you did do a blind taste test, right?
Yeah. The tasting was blind. I mean, people didn't know, which beer was which. I gave them two beers, and unfortunately, I said one is decocted, one isn't. So you tell me what you think of these two beers, and that's where I gave them the questionnaire to fill out about which one was maltier, which one had more body, etc.
And what was your overall conclusion on the value of decocting?
I have not really changed my opinion, and I still do a decoction once or twice a year, just in case I missed something. But I still don't feel like decoction makes enough difference in a beer to make it worth the effort. But that's why I want to redo this experiment and keep some tighter controls on it. And, I'd like it to become just a little bit more definitive than it was when I originally did it. So, and talking to Brew Your Own magazine, it looks like they're possibly interested in me redoing some of these experiments and writing up the results for them.
And again, you did an experiment also with first wort hopping, right? A similar experiment.
Yeah, I did. And this one I had learned from some of the mistakes that I did in the first one. So I told the tasters nothing about the beers. Basically what happened was that I made 10 gallons of wort, divided it into two 5-gallon batches. Mm-hmm. One batch got an ounce of Cascades at 60 minutes. The other batch got an ounce of the same Cascades as first wort hops. Those were the only hops in either batch, and then they were boiled for the same amount of time, fermented at the same temperature. The rest of the process was the same. Jamil put together a tasting panel in California. Mm-hmm. I put together one here in Eugene, consisting of really experienced homebrewers, BJCP judges, commercial brewers. Brought the beers in, and this time was smart enough to tell them nothing other than there are 3 glasses of beer in front of you. Is one of them different? If so, which one is it?
So this time you use a double blind test, right?
Exactly, yeah. I didn't even say to them, one of these beers is different. Which one is it? I said, is one of these beers different? Because, I was trying to make it as objective as possible. So I gave everyone a set of questions to answer about the beers. The first question is, these three samples are the same, one is different from the other two, or all three are different from each other. Then as we went through it, it's like, if you detected one is different, which one do you think it was? Talked about the qualities that the beers had in terms of hop flavor, aroma, bitterness, stuff like that, answered questions. At that point, anyone who was able to correctly identify the different beer was given another list of questions to answer about which one they perceive to be more bitter, the quality of the bitterness, things like that. But basically, the idea is, if you couldn't pick out the different beer in the first part, then obviously it didn't make enough difference to matter, or that maybe your taste buds weren't attuned enough to be able to pick out the different one.
Mm-hmm. So what'd you find in this particular test? It sounds like you evaluated a whole bunch of different questions. What were some of the answers?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things that I did this time was I sent the beers to two different labs to have them analyzed for IBUs. One was Analysis Laboratory in Lebanon, Oregon, who does analysis work for a lot of breweries. The other one was to SS Steiner, which is one of the world's largest hop wholesalers. Both tests came back with the first wort hopped beer measuring about 10% more IBUs than the 60-minute only beer. But interestingly enough, that wasn't the way that they were perceived across the board. There were a total of 18 tasters. 13 of them said, yes, there is a different beer here. But of those, only 7 of them were able to correctly identify that different beer. So that's pretty small statistically. And the results were kind of like inconclusive in which beer people felt was more bitter, which beer people felt had a smoother bitterness. It was kind of divided among that, and there was really no clear conclusion. However, this is one of the places where my pragmatism comes into play. Mm-hmm. If first wort hopping took as much time and effort as decoction, I would say I'm never going to first wort hop a beer again. However, it's pretty darn easy. And in my mind, I think it does make a difference, so I continue to do it to this day. Again, just another reason why I would like to run this experiment again and see what kind of results we get a second time.
So what would you do different the second time?
I'm not sure I would do much different in methodology. I would make every effort to make sure that the two beers were brewed as closely as possible to each other. That's a lot easier for me to do these days because I'm brewing part of the time, at least, on a Pico Zymatic, and that makes things like this experiment extremely repeatable. So, I've been using that for a lot of my current experiments and testings.
Now, does time factor in here as well? I mean, if the beers aren't brewed at exactly the same time or very close in time, aren't they going to have a different flavor as well?
Absolutely true. And, that's why the decoction experiment, you absolutely have to brew the beers back to back, maybe on different days or maybe a week apart. First wort hopping experiment is much easier in that regard, in that you can just split the batch of wort and do 2 boils simultaneously and then have 2 beers that were produced at exactly the same time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what was your overall conclusion from the first wort hop? You thought it was worthwhile in general?
My feeling is that it's worthwhile. A lot of other people felt like it wasn't. I'm not going to make any big, bold statements like first wort hopping will give you more hop flavor or will give you smoother hop bitterness. I think it does. I encourage other people to try an experiment like this for themselves and make up their own minds, because Not everyone agrees with me. And again, I want to do this experiment again with a different tasting panel and some really tight controls over the brewing of the beers to make sure they're as identical as possible.
Now, Dr. Charlie Bamforth and I think it was Dr. Smythe did some experiments that you cited as well. Can you describe their experiment? It had some much tighter controls on it.
Yeah, it did, and this is one that I just absolutely love to pull out to homebrewers because so many homebrewers are so certain that they can't be fooled, and there's a whole series of tests that have been done that show you how easy it is to fool yourself. So Dr. Bamforth and Dr. Smythe pulled together 3 tasting panels. Each panel had a different level of training to it. The Belgian panels were like really highly trained. The panel in Finland was moderately trained. And the panel of Irish tasters was totally untrained, which always brings off Irish beer jokes, but we'll skip those today. So basically what they did was they gave these panels 2 sets of beers. They said, okay, this beer is brewed with traditional ingredients. This beer has about 20% adjuncts in it. Then they gave them another set of beers and they said, okay, this beer is brewed using traditional processes and techniques. This other beer over here is brewed with special processes that mean that the beer is totally fermented out in like 3 days or something like that, something insane. So what the tasters didn't know was that all of these beers were exactly the same. All 4 of them were exactly the same beer. So that the interesting thing is that the more highly trained the testers were, the less that they were able to pick out any differences between the beer, meaning that they were less likely to be fooled. But still, even among the highly trained Belgian testers, there was a real preference for the beers that they thought were brewed with traditional methods and traditional ingredients. With the less training you had, the more susceptible you were to the suggestions that these beers were not brewed traditionally, and the more you thought that that made a difference. But again, let me stress that these were all 4 exactly the same beers, and just the suggestion of differences between them made the tasters find a difference. Now, I see much the same thing happening with, for instance, decoction in homebrewers. Homebrewers go, it took me 4 extra hours to do that decoction, and I just know it made a better beer. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but are you really objectively evaluating the beers blindly so that you know that it really made a difference? If you're the kind of person that likes doing a decoction for the tradition because you enjoy the process, then I'm never going to tell you not to do it. But I am going to tell you it might not be making a difference in your beer, and that you should keep doing it because you enjoy it and not because it's going to make a huge difference in your beer.
So, I mean, their overall conclusion was it that the more experienced judges did a better job or not?
Yes, the more experienced judges did a better job, but they were still able to be fooled. And that's the main thing right there, is that no matter how experienced you are, there is this thing called confirmation bias, that if you think something is a certain way, then you're really going to think it's that way.
Yeah, I think, and you'll excuse me, I'm doing this from memory, but Charlie came on the show several years ago and described a similar experiment where they took, I think it was stale beer, and actually put it on different brand names, coasters.
Right. Yes.
And just the act of putting the beer on the brand name coaster as opposed to the off-brand name coaster affected the way the judges judge the beer.
And they've done this with school children. They've taken the same hamburger, put them like in a plain bag and a McDonald's bag, and every single time the kids say the McDonald's burger tastes better. A couple other quick studies here that I just love that I want to mention. Lars Marius Garshall, a Norwegian guy, put together a panel of highly experienced tasters, and they were given two beers, one dark, one light. The Asked to describe them. The dark beer was, talked about, the tasters talked about being roasty, having caramel flavors. Both beers were pilsners. Only one of them had coloring added to it.
So
There was
literally food coloring, is that right?
yeah, exactly. So there was no taste added whatsoever, but just by the color of the beer, they did it. They did another round of these tastings, and again, the beer was, described as having a lasting brown head. It was roasty, maybe a bit sweet, slightly estery. It was a Hefeweizen with black food color.
So it was a roasty Hefeweizen, right?
Well, it was a roasty looking Hefeweizen. There was actually no roast character to it at all.
Just food coloring again, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then in another one, very much like what you were describing, Frederick Brochet, this was done with wine, but, same deal, assembled a panel at the University of Bordeaux. He had 54 highly experienced wine tasters. He gave
sommeliers, right?
I assume so, and the article didn't specifically say, but yeah, sommelier or something like that. Gave them a glass of red wine, glass of white wine. The red wine was described as jammy and heavy and like red fruit and stuff like that. Well, and of course, if you haven't figured out by now, it was the same white wine with red food coloring in it.
Of course.
Another test took the same wine, put some of it in a bottle from a Grand Cru, and the other one in a bottle that had a label from an ordinary tasting wine. Tasters unanimously picked the wine in the bottle with the fancy label, even though it was exactly the same wine. And it's real interesting. And the last one that I like to cite is from Avenue Vine magazine in 2008, where they did the similar thing where they had two bottles of wine that were the same, but they were told that one was much more expensive than the other one. And they actually did a brainwave scan of people as they tasted them and found that physical changes were occurring in the brains of the people as they tasted these two wines. And they were not just kind of thinking that they enjoyed the more expensive wine better. Their brain was actually telling them that this wine was better.
That's pretty amazing. So,
yeah.
So evaluating beer is much harder than it looks. How can a home brewer get better at evaluating beer?
Well, obviously practicing, and it's not a bad thing to have to practice. You need to remember that evaluating beer is much different than just drinking beer. I mean, we all know how to drink beer. But when you evaluate beer, you have to make sure that there are no external influences coming in any way. In experimental homebrewing, we go through a lot of detail in explaining how to set up a blind triangle tasting. It's really not hard to do, and how to use the student's t-test, as it's called, to evaluate the results to see if you're getting a significantly or statistically significant deviation that actually tells you that there is a difference being made. Students' t-test, since I don't have a book in front of me here, I'm not even going to try and describe it to you, but I will tell you that Excel and most of the other spreadsheets have that formula built into it. So following the directions in the book is pretty easy to set up a spreadsheet.
Yeah, t-test is a statistical method, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And it gives you an indication of bias, I guess, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So and that's really what you need to do, and you need to do it over and over until you become comfortable with the concepts and the methods of doing this blind tasting.
I mean, what do you think about something like the Beer Judge certification program or something similar where you're actually evaluating a lot of beers?
Oh, I think it's great, man. BJCP is a wonderful program. I just went through doing a study group and giving a test recently. And I think that that's a really, really good place to start in honing your tasting skills. But then you need to learn to apply those correctly, which again is through doing a blind triangle tasting. But I think that once you go through the BJCP training, that when you get to the blind triangle tasting, you have a lot more acuity in being able to figure out what's going on there.
So what are some of the implications of all of this, all of your conclusions, I guess, for those looking to make better beer?
It comes back to make the best beer possible with the least effort possible while having the most fun possible. To me, least effort and most fun are the keys there, because you're not going to be wasting your time doing things that don't really pay off in you making better beer. And by learning the blind triangle tasting technique, you have a way to really decide if indeed you are making better beer.
And you're going to talk about this, I guess, at the AHA conference coming up in June, right?
Drew and I will be doing a seminar there on experimental homebrewing, a bit like the one we did in Michigan, not exactly though, but we'll be talking again about the importance of how to do a blind triangle tasting. We'll probably even do one live on stage, live wacky science, as we like to say. Before that, we're heading down to Brazil to speak at their National Homebrew Conference, and we're going to be talking about something very similar down there. I guess you went down there last year, and
I really enjoyed it very much.
It sounds like,
yeah.
It sounds like a great event, and before that, I'm actually flying down to Pasadena for a couple days before we go to LA, so that Drew and I can brew together. I had threatened when we were doing experimental homebrewing, we sent out questionnaires to a bunch of people, and I had threatened that if they didn't get them back to us in a timely fashion, Drew would unleash upon the world his version of Manhattan clam chowder saison.
Nice.
Drew being a Bostoner took great offense at the fact that he would make Manhattan clam chowder anything, and said no, it would be a New England clam chowder saison. So that's what we're going to brew, is a New England clam chowder saison. We'll have it at NHC, and just confirmed today is that John Palmer will be joining us for the brew also.
Oh boy, I can't wait. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah,
of course, we're talking about Drew. We keep referring to Drew. It's Drew Beecham as your co-author on the experimental homebrewing book. Yep. And John Palmer, of course, the author of How to Brew, and did several videos with me as well.
Right. Yep. So we'll have three crazy guys brewing clam chowder saison, and we will have it for people to try at NHC.
That's a little frightening to me, but yeah, sounds great.
Well, the first time Drew brought his saison guacamole up to me, my first reaction was to scream and run. But I actually tried it, and I'll be darned if he didn't pull it off. So yeah, I figure if there's anybody in the world, that can pull off clam chowder saison, it's him, and I want to be there for it.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add specific to the experiments you talked about?
I just want to really encourage people to learn how to do a blind triangle tasting when they're evaluating their own beer, especially when they're working to make changes to improve your beer. Make one change at a time, stop, evaluate it objectively, and move on from there. Don't be afraid to brew things over and over again until you get it right. You may get it right the first time, but if you do, you're better at it than I am.
Cool. Well, I also want to ask you, since we got a minute or two here at the end, if you want to say a few words about your book, Experimental Homebrewing. You said it came out last October, of course, and you co-authored it with Drew Beecham. And you say it's been selling very well. Yeah.
Yeah, it has been selling so well that Amazon has been out of stock several times. So if you go to order it and they're out of stock, just keep working on it. It will be back. You can also get it through Barnes and Noble, or you can get it directly from our publisher at their website, which is Q, as in the letter Q, qbookshop.com.
Okay, qbookshop.com. I'm sorry you broke up a little there. I just wanted to push that. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or qbookshop.com has the book Experimental Homebrewing. And just say a few words about what it's about, too, please.
We try and approach experimental from both sides of the equation. Experimental in the sense of maybe some unusual beers with wacky ingredients, but then experimental also in the science sense that I've been talking about how to make beers a little bit more scientifically, how to evaluate them more scientifically. So, you're going to see recipes in the book for, my wee heavy with chanterelle mushrooms, for a pork chop beer, for Drew's plethora of beers that you say to yourself, how did anybody ever think about that? But then you're also going to see things about how to improve the beer that you brew through using scientific methods to evaluate it and change things.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Denny. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that I got to tell you, man, that it is probably the most entertaining homebrewing book that you will ever run across. We tried to keep it not deadly dull. When we tell people, it's as if the guys from Car Talk went out for beers with Mr. Wizard and talked about homebrewing. There's a lot of back and forth between Drew and me, and it's a pretty darn entertaining read, and I think you'll find some really useful information on top of that.
Well, you guys are both colorful characters, so that doesn't surprise me at all. Have you, I want to ask, is there anything else you'd like to add, Denny?
Just keep your eyes open for Homebrew All-Stars. I think that's going to be another book that'll be really, really useful in terms of taking the next step in your brewing, and I don't think that there's ever been another homebrewing book like it. We kind of try to follow through in both experimental homebrewing and Homebrew All-Stars. We don't want to be the voice of authority saying this is how you have to brew. There are enough books out there that tell you how to brew. John's, Charlie's, a number of them. So in both books, what we're trying to do is present you with a number of techniques and ideas and ways to evaluate what happens when you apply those techniques and ideas, so you can decide for yourself what the right way for you to brew is.
Well, thank you again, Denny. Really appreciate you being on the show. It's
a real pleasure, Brad. I always look forward to it.
So thanks again to Mr. Denny Conn. He's the author of Experimental Homebrewing, I'm sorry. You can find his website at dennybrew.com. Thanks, Denny.
See you in San Diego.
Thanks to Denny Conn for joining me this week for episode number 102. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, where you can get your 15% discount on their magazine or anything in their store if you use the offer code BeerSmith 2015 when you shop at beerandbrewing.com. Again, use the offer code BeerSmith 2015 and get your subscription now at beerandbrewing.com. And also Brewha. The Brewha BIAC is an all-in-one stainless brewing system that takes up less space, requires less time, and gives you amazing control. Check out this new brewing system at brewhaequipment.com. Again, brewhaequipment.com. Finally, I'll send you a free article on homebrewing every week via email if you sign up for my newsletter at beersmith.com. Just enter your name and email address in the newsletter box on the right sidebar. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great brewing week.